Share via email. Report story. By XXPadFootXX. Summary. She had saved his life, while he ran for the nearest shelter. He knew in his heart he had just been trying to help, but it was his fault. His fault she had been taken. Ochako gets taken by a villain in a horrible accident. How will Izuku and Class 1A react? This is my first fanfic which I also posted on fanfiction.net, so be aware of that. I have edited this so there are fewer errors and it is easier to read, but you have been warned. Equals 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 dot. Chapter 1. Lights flashed all around him. Loud sirens echoed in his ears and the pounding of rushed footsteps made the street vibrate beneath his red sneakers. Izuku Midoriya sat on a nearby bench, a fluffy blanket draped over his hunched shoulders and a bottle of water sitting untouched beside him. He was shaking, and he watched his own tears drip onto the pavement around his shoes as the memories replayed in his mind like some horrible movie stuck on a loop. It had been a normal day, training at UA High School proving as grueling and difficult as usual, his schoolwork nearly finished as the evening had begun to set in. He had left his room to meet his classmates in the main living space of the dorms when Ochako had come to him asking if he wanted to come with her to pick up some supplies for the cakes Sato was planning on making that night after dinner. He had quickly agreed, excited to get some fresh air and secretly excited to spend some alone time with Ochako. They had left with the promise that they would return soon and had enjoyed a lovely evening together walking down to the town that held the nearest supermarket. It had all happened so fast, Izuku could barely remember the sequence of events that had followed the two of them leaving the supermarket with their groceries. They had taken a more quiet route back to the campus to avoid the groups of people who would crowd around them excitedly once they recognized them as UA students. It had gotten dark, but the pair had brought flashlights to see. Unfortunately, the darkness still hindered their ability to see and it had resulted in a villain creeping up on them. The villain had used the darkness as a cover before cornering them in an empty alleyway, holding them at gunpoint. Izuku had tried to run to the nearest shop to get help using One for All. He had known that fighting would have been useless against an 8-metal armed villain with a gun. He had almost made it, his power surging him forward, but then the shot had rung out. Izuku remembered bracing himself for the pain until it never came and he heard a loud scream behind him. The image of Ochako's limp, injured form lying on the pavement was burned in his brain as if Bakugo had placed it there, torturing him every time it replayed in his mind. She had saved his life, while he ran for the nearest shelter. He knew in his heart he had just been trying to help, but it was his fault. His fault she had been taken. When he had turned to race back to her side, he had tripped over the rubble the villain's 8 metal arms had created in the road and had fallen to the ground, landing hard on the broken blacktop. The last thing he remembered was the villain rushing at Ochako while at the same time throwing rubble in his direction. When the police and ambulances had arrived, they had said that he was lucky he did not suffer more severe head damage from the few pieces of rubble that had managed to hit him. He guessed he was lucky that the villain had such a bad aim. The police had given him the fluffy blanket for the shock once he had been cleared physically by the doctors on site. The teachers from UA suddenly appeared at the scene, Izawa and All Might being the first ones to arrive, Izawa striding up to the police immediately while All Might trotted over to Izuku. Although he tried, Izuku could not force his body to stop shaking even as his idol strode over to him, tears in his eyes as well. "Oh Midoriya my boy," he said. "You are alive and relatively okay." He reached a thin hand up and gingerly rested it on Izuku's head wound which was wrapped with thick white gauze. Izuku said nothing as more tears streamed down his face. All Might said nothing more as the two sat in silence on the bench, waiting for news from Aizawa who was now speaking with more urgency to the police. Aizawa's face was white as a sheet, even more pale than usual, his face tight with suppressed emotion. With a final word, he stalked away from the police and made his way over to Izuku, who refused to look into his teacher's eyes. "Are you all right, Izuku?" he asked. Izuku was so surprised at the use of his first name by his most strict teacher that he looked right into his eyes before he could even register what had happened. As soon as he met eyes with Aizawa, Izuku could not bring himself to tear away from that locking gaze. "I'm okay," he said, his voice shaking. Aizawa glanced at All Might, his brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay to talk about what happened?" "Not now, Aizawa," All Might countered. "He is obviously not fit to recall those events at this moment, just give him a little bit." Izuku looked up at his idol and saw a bit of annoyance mixed in with the concern that filled his eyes. Aizawa stared at All Might for a few seconds before bowing to Izuku. "My apologies, Midoriya, let's get you back to the dorms," he said, straightening. "What about Uraraka?" Izuku called out to his teachers retreating back. Aizawa paused. "We are starting rescue operations immediately, but the villain you described is an unknown one. He is not in the immediate police records, so we have to do a little bit of research before we try to plunge right into the belly of the monster." "But, we are trying everything we can right now, Midoriya. I know she was your good friend, but you need to try to think about her for a second. If we try to go into this blindly, then it could endanger her further. She could more easily be used as a hostage or she could be killed." Aizawa said without turning. The last sentence sent a chill down Izuku's spine as if Todoroki had used his quirk to solidify his back into a solid ice block. "She's not a good friend," Izuku mumbled. "She's the best friend I've ever had." Aizawa turned to face Midoriya, his face blank but his eyes wide with emotion. Aizawa did not show his emotions too often, but now, in this time of fear and danger, Aizawa could not help but show emotion for one of his most hard-working students. Although he did not tell Midoriya, he greatly feared for Ochako's life. Promoted stories. You'll also like Mirko X Shy Male Reader 170K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Return of Mokuden discontinued 3.5K 45. This story is officially up for adoption. If anyone is interested, message me or comment on the story. The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 57.1K 1.8 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. Feelings. Izawa. X Reader 57.2K 1.3 KRE posting. This until I edit it, sorry if it's not good, it's my first time writing a story. You enroll at UA and you have multiple quirks you are really good at using, why? Hurt cuz I love you to death Izuocha. Ha. 8.7K 141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as the hero who sings with a smile 38.9K 366 high. Guys, this is my first story I write on Wattpad. I hope you like it. Izuku had been very grateful for Aizawa, All Might, and his mother, Inko, who walked him back to the dorms after comforting him on the bench for a while. His mother had shown up in tears similar to her son and had embraced him in a rib-cracking hug upon laying eyes on him. Now though, he was happy to be alone with his thoughts as he padded up to the steps of the dorm entrance, his shoes scuffing the pavement as he walked half-heartedly to the doors. He sighed and pushed them open, his face washed in gold as the light from inside covered his entire body. He stood back blinking, his eyes adjusting to the bright lights coming from inside. Every single light in the building must be turned on, Midoriya realized as he was finally able to walk inside. As soon as he thought he was adjusted to the lighting in the building, everything went black again. He yelped in surprise as several student bodies rushed for him, blocking out the lights as they crowded him, all of them talking at once. He tried to push through or get their attention, but it was a mass of fear and confusion that surrounded him, his classmates not hearing a word he was saying even though they were all foaming at the mouth to hear an explanation for their prolonged absence and Aizawa's quick departure. Suddenly, a loud clear voice rang out over the crowd. Everyone back away from Midoriya. Give him some space, now. Ida's voice broke apart the students of Class 1A, their shock evident on their faces as his angry voice echoed throughout the room. Thank you, he said with a quick bow. He then made his way over to Izuku, a supportive arm around his shoulders as he guided him to the couch. The other students followed close behind, but they gave the pair some space this time. The whole class gathered in the main living space, their eyes on Izuku. Silence filled the room. Are you okay? Kirishima asked after the silence had stretched for some time. You look pretty beat up. Izuku looked at Kirishima and saw that his eyes were kind and soft like they always were when he was speaking to someone in need. But even with the encouragement evident in Kirishima's eyes, Izuku could not bring himself to tell them what had happened. He had failed them. The tears that had finally dried on his face were now replaced with new ones, bright salty tears that slid down his face and landed on his pant legs. Really? You are crying again, you dumbass baby. Izuku stiffened at Bakugo's words, his rage hardly contained as the arrogant boy slunk from behind the couch to get a good look at Izuku's face. Bakugo, you insensitive. Bakugo cut Iida off. Man, you are having some real issues today, Iida. I think you have been hanging out with this damn nerd and his fat-ass floaty friend too much lately, Bakugo said with a laugh. Bakugo didn't even see Midoriya swing around to face him, but he did feel the sudden sting on his face and he felt the force of the punch throw his body backward. Bakugo hit the wall with surprising force and groaned with pain and surprise. Midoriya! Iida shouted in utter shock. Izuku didn't say a word as he rose from the couch and sprinted to his room, slamming the door behind him. What the hell was that all about? Kaminari asked, his face a perfect representation of the feelings of the students assembled. I don't know, Sue said, her eyes wide with concern. I don't know either, but whatever happened, it's bad, Bakugo said. He sat up slowly and pushed himself to his feet. Kirishima leapt up from his spot on the couch and rushed to Bakugo's side, holding out a hand to him to help him up. After a pause, Bakugo accepted the hand and stood up with another groan of pain. He looked behind him to see a sizable dent in the wall. He turned back around to face the students assembled. I have bullied him for most of our childhood, Bakugo admitted. I even told him to kill himself once. The class gasped and Iida even growled in anger. But the thing is, Bakugo turned to look in the direction of Midoriya's room. He's never lifted a finger towards me before. Not even harsh words, he has always bounced back as bright and caring as before. Something is extremely wrong. The class all looked towards Midoriya's room in silence, the room thick with unanswered questions. Chapter 2. Iida knew that Izuku's door was unlocked even as he knocked, so when no answer responded to his question of entry, he pushed the door open anyway. Izuku was lying on his bed, his eyes closed as he held a Polaroid photo to his chest, his breathing still hitched and uneven as if he were still crying despite the lack of tears. Iida swallowed his own tears and looked back at Tsuyu, Tokiyami, and Kirishima, who was waiting behind him for news. Iida nodded at them and the four of them filed into the room, closing the door carefully behind them. The rest of the students had already gone back to their rooms, exhausted in the after effects of the adrenaline rush caused by the panic of the situation. These four students had remained behind though, too worried about their friend to sleep. Izuku did not stir for a while. Someone looking in on him may have thought him to be sleeping, but his close friends knew better. He was lying awake, he was just trying to drown himself in sleep. When his four friends did not leave after a while of waiting, Izuku slowly opened his eyes and without turning his head, looked at them. His eyes were still a little watery but most of his tears had dried up. Kirishima sat on the floor while Tokiyami and Tsuyu found two chairs to sit in, pulling them to the center of the room on either side of Kirishima. Iida, however, made his way over to Izuku's bed and sat down on the end of it, his eyes never leaving his friend. Nobody said a word. And then, in the dark silence, Izuku spoke so softly that if any sound at all had been in the room, his friends would not have heard it. It's my fault. He gulped. I should have protected her. I should have gone in her place, or died for her rather than run for help. I'm so stupid. Ida's eyes flashed. None of Class 1A knew what had happened, but they had a pretty good idea, they just didn't know the details. That sentence alone confirmed their fears. Midoriya, please, tell us what happened. We want to help in any way possible. Tokiyami spoke up from his chair on the left side of Kirishima. Izuku gulped again, trying desperately and failing to keep more tears from sliding down his cheeks. I. Izuku took a deep breath and sat up from his pillow, turning to look at his friends directly. I failed Ochako. He cried out. I let her get shot and taken by villains instead of protecting her. I can't even hold a candle to her. She saved my life and I acted like a coward, not a hero. He placed his face in his hands and sobbed into them, his shoulders heaving. Iida looked down at Izuku's lap to where the Polaroid photo had fallen when he sat up. Iida's own tears surfaced and spilled down his cheeks as he stared at the photo of Izuku and Ochako laughing while floating in the air, Ochako spraying Izuku with water while he laughed and attempted to shield himself with his hands. Iida remembered that day because he had taken the photo for them. Quickly rubbing his eyes with his sleeve, Iida stood from the end of the bed and sat beside Izuku, wrapping an arm around his shaking shoulders while he cried. Nobody spoke, they just listened as Izuku attempted to stifle his sobs, Iida holding him in his sturdy arms. Suddenly, everyone in the room whipped around as the door to Izuku's door was blasted open, and everyone except Izuku frowned when Bakugo stepped into the room, his hand still smoking. Everyone clear out. I need to speak to Deku, he said, his arms crossed over his chest and his foot tapping impatiently on the floor of the bedroom. Iida stood up sharply, his hand still resting comfortingly on Izuku's shoulder. Whatever you want to say can be said in front of us. Iida snapped. Izuku had never heard him sound so angry before. I don't trust you, Bakugo, and we don't need you making the situation worse. Bakugo's face scrunched into a snarl for a moment and then suddenly relaxed. Please, I need to speak to him alone. Izuku looked up from the photo he had been miserably staring at and looked directly into Bakugo's face. He saw the determined flash in his eyes and made a decision. It's okay everyone, thanks for coming in, but I want to hear what Kachan has to say. Ida's eyes searched Izuku's face before he closed them and nodded grimly. If he gives you any trouble just say the word, Midoriya, Iida said before stalking past Bakugo and out the door, Tsuyu, Kirishima, and Tokiyami following him out. As soon as the door shut behind them, Bakugo grabbed the chair that Tokiyami had been sitting in and dragged it to the side of the bed so that he was as close to Izuku as he was comfortable getting. I heard what happened, Bakugo said quietly after they had sat in an awkward silence together for a while. Izuku just closed his eyes and forced himself not to cry as the horrible memories replayed in his mind. I am only going to say this once, so listen carefully you damn nerd, Bakugo said, standing from his chair and pacing in front of the bed. You have a thing for Ochako, don't you? Bakugo said, spinning to look Izuku straight in the eye. Izuku was flabbergasted and tried to search for the right words in a slight haze of panic. Kachan. I. 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 Bakugo held up a hand to silence him but did not break his gaze from Izuku's eyes. I said, you have a thing for Ochako, don't you? Don't you? Bakugo said with more assertion this time. Yes. Izuku gasped out, his shoulders slumping even more. Bakugo nodded at him curtly and continued his pacing. Listen to me, nerd. You're the cause of this issue. You tried to follow a course of action that did not have the best outcome. I know it was not for selfish reasons, but that is what happened. As a result, Ochako was injured and kidnapped by a dangerous villain. I already know what happened, Kachan. Izuku snapped, cutting him off. I don't understand your purpose in talking to me if you are just going to bury me further in shame. Bakugo suddenly launched forward, placing both hands on Izuku's shoulders and pinning him to the back headboard of the bed. I am here because although you screwed up, you are the strongest person I know. The compliment shocked Izuku so much that his mouth just hung, frozen open so that no words could come out. And despite the things I say about her, Round Cheeks is an amazing hero. She will rise through the ranks faster than a lot of our class will due to her kindness and loyalty, but also her strength, determination, and fighting spirit. We will get her back, and we will destroy the villain that threatened my friends and your girlfriend. Izuku blushed deeply at Bakugo's last remark but could not form the words to correct him. Quote. Kachan. Don't even try to correct me. Bakugo snapped, sitting up and releasing Izuku from the headboard. We will get her back if it is the last thing we do, Izuku. Even through the haze of shock that swallowed Izuku at the fact that Bakugo had used his real name, he managed to nod, a look of fierce determination taking over his features. Bakugo thought he could even see a hint of love mixed in with that fury. Bakugo stood and walked over to the door, flinging it open so hard that it hit the wall and made a small dent. Let's go get her, Bakugo said. Right. Izuku yelled, leaping up from his place on the bed. Izuku turned and placed the Polaroid photo on his bedside table before following Bakugo out of his room. Go get dressed in your hero costume, we are going hunting, Bakugo said with a wicked smile, his hands popping as he created small sparks. Of course. I'll also go wake a few of the others, we will need their help. Izuku said, making his way to Ida's room while Bakugo walked over to Todoroki's, his hands still smoking. Soon a small group of heroes in training was gathered in the main living space, their costumes on and their faces set as Izuku and Bakugo started to lead the charge. The group consisted of Todoroki, Iida, Tokiyami, Tsuyu, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, Shoji, Bakugo and Izuku. The team made their way through the dorms and outside, walking quietly off of the path, veering instead through the forest to avoid detection. The night was chilly and deathly quiet, but the group remained on high alert. Izuku led the group with Bakugo and Tsuyu at his side, trying to scrape a plan together as they walked. He would have liked to have been better prepared, but he feared for Ochako's life, unsure if she would survive the night. He shook his head as he remembered Bakugo's words. She was strong, she would survive the night, and he would reach her no matter what. With the normal sounds of the night the group might have missed it, but in the dead quiet of this night, they heard the soft shift of pine needles as someone approached them. The group froze as the sound grew louder. They were just about to scatter and hide when a slim figure dressed in black slipped through the trees behind them and whispered so that they all jumped like frogs in surprise. Did you really think you could leave undetected? Aizawa said, his voice a deadly whisper filled with suppressed venom. The teen whipped around with their fists raised as they looked right at their angry teacher. What are all of you thinking? Aizawa snarled, his eyes glinting like red rubies, and his hair raised above his head like hackles raised on a dog. Bakugo stepped forward, meeting Aizawa's wrath with a furious snarl. It was my idea, but we are going to rescue our friend before she ends up looking like a string of ribbon. I said that the police are on the case. Aizawa snapped. Fuck the police. Bakugo snapped and everyone gasped. They are too slow. Uraraka will resemble something like gum on the bottom of your boot if we do not do something now. If Aizawa was shocked he did not reveal it, he just stared down Bakugo, his fury building like dragon fire. Finally, Aizawa spoke again. Do you even know where you are going? Aizawa asked. We are going to the crime scene, Todoroki said. We are going to go look for clues as to where the villain might have gone with Uraraka. Aizawa tilted his head. Not a bad place to start, but you are not allowed at the crime scene. Going there can be identified as meddling with evidence, which is a punishable crime. Tisk. Bakugo closed his eyes and raised his head in frustration, his hair glowing a milky blonde in the moonlight. I guess you will need a pro to give you access through the police, Aizawa said.
Let me mute this shit, bitch.
I guess you will need a pro to give you access through the police, Aizawa said. The students assembled looked up in surprise at what he was suggesting. Aizawa sighed and placed a hand on the bridge of his nose, his hair falling back into place and his eyes dimming in their fierceness. I understand how you feel, and secretly, I agree, Aizawa said, looking at them directly without blinking. The class was held in his gaze. I should not condone this behavior, and I will not in the future, but I will help you. The students released a breath and smiled at one another. Izuku looked directly at his teacher and saw him nod ever so slightly. Izuku nodded back and smiled a little so that Aizawa could see his gratitude. Aizawa didn't react, but Izuku could have sworn he saw the corners of his teacher's mouth twitch upwards. Let's go get Uraraka back, Aizawa said, his eyes bright with unhidden sorrow and fierce anger that swelled like a beast uncurling in his heart. After all, I can't let one of my flock be picked off by the wolves, otherwise more danger will come. Aizawa took a breath. I must protect every single one of my children. He said the last part so quietly that the students thought they had imagined it, but the shock written on the faces around them convinced them otherwise. Izuku and Bakugo fell back behind Aizawa and they began to trudge through the forest. Together. Where stories live. Discover now.